Don't hear the record. Welcome everyone to the Cardinal Cross of Life, Pluto square to the nodal axis. And my name is Michelle Dench. I am what I would call an intuitive evolutionary astrologer, in that predominantly I have studied evolutionary astrology as taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green through the lineage of Ari Moshe Wolf and Kristen Fontana and Rose Marcus and many other colleagues who I deeply respect in this work from these sort of original teachings of Jeffrey. I also consider myself an intuitive astrologer because I've studied many different Western and modern and sort of foundational, very traditional astrological lineages. And from the amalgamation of all of this through my Gemini moon, I continue to evolve the way that I see the chart, and in particular through a form of channeling what I see in the chart. So today is kind of an example of that, because I wanted to speak to the evolutionary shift that we're coming into in 2023. And while this is in part a a cycle that is particular to this year and this time, we will have both many children, souls being born at this time, and an ongoing evolutionary imprint of this particular time. And so I just wanted to break down from my own perspective how I see this square of Pluto to the nodal axis and how I'm beginning to integrate it. And I also want to speak to some of the marker points of this particular Pluto transit, because a lot of people are talking right now about Pluto entering Aquarius, and that is a big deal. And of course, that is going to be happening a week from today. Really, we're in this last and final degrees of Pluto moving at the end of Capricorn and edging its way towards 0 degrees Aquarius. The final final full ingress of Pluto into Aquarius will occur on November 19th, 2024. So we will have about a year of year and a half, let's say, 2 9-month cycles of Pluto going back from Capricorn, or from Aquarius into Capricorn. And while that is happening, we're going to have the nodal axis of the moon. So the north node, which is currently transiting in the sign of Taurus, and the south node in the sign of Scorpio, they will be moving into the sign of Aries and Libra. And so we will have a cycle in this year where Pluto is being squared by the nodal axis of the moon. And a part of what I want to also touch on briefly is the eclipse season, which begins April 20th with the first eclipse in the cycle. And that eclipse is a new moon eclipse at 29 degrees Aries on what would be the north node point where Pluto will square the nodal axis. So it feels relevant to me to also address that eclipse as sort of a marker of what we're dealing with. And it's in part because the way I see the cardinal axis from an evolutionary perspective is that this cardinal cross is the cross of life, right? We have it the representative of Mother Moon, Father. We could call Father Saturn, or ruled by Saturn, Capricorn, Cancer, Moon, Mother. And we have the masculine feminine axis. So we have Mars, the god of war, ruling Aries, and Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, ruling Libra. And so we have the masculine and the feminine, and the mother and the father from an archetypal perspective, really anchoring the cross of life. All life on this planet, all human beings in incarnation, not all, we're not talking about plant and animal matter, but we could call the structural foundation of what human beings experience as life comes through the mother and the father, and the masculine and the feminine, right? And then the identity and the expression of self, the identification of self, becomes developed in the Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, Scorpio axis. So, in part, a part of what we're dealing with right now is that as we move with Pluto moving into Aquarius in these next few days here, we'll just look at that movement a week from now. We have Pluto in Aquarius, and it's moving towards this square to the nodal axis. And even the ingress of Pluto comes with, in the early hours of that ingress, the moon on the north node being square, moving in a square to Pluto, right? Moving towards the north node in Taurus and squaring Pluto. And so that to me indicates that sort of primary function of how our identity, Aquarius, community, humanity, at Leo, our self, Taurus being ruled by Venus, Taurus, our identification to earthly embodiment and pleasure, and Scorpio, like the roots, the deepest part of our emotional transmutational quality, right? Pluto ruling that south node in Scorpio. This is the overhauling rebirth. This is the rebirth of who we are through the lens of the moon, in terms of what we are growing into, we are becoming, where are we going as human beings, as human creatures, and through the south node being the resolution node in this case. What are we releasing in humanity, and what's interesting about all of this in terms of this Pluto ingress also is that we have Mars in an inconjunct to Pluto, just about to enter Cancer, and we have Saturn in Pisces. And I looked, the last time that Pluto and Saturn were together was in 1786. So, it'll be a while. Saturn will be in Pisces 30 years from now when Pluto is in Pisces and they make a conjunction. The whole time Pluto is in Aquarius, the entire 20 years that Pluto will transit the sign of Aquarius, we will never see them make a conjunction to one another. And that in and of itself is a fascinating thing to me. But so from an evolutionary perspective, we've just begun this new Saturn cycle of Saturn in Pisces. We have the North Node ruler, Venus, moving towards Uranus. This to me indicates a revolution of our identity at the very core of what we consider identity. And when we are thinking about, from an evolutionary perspective, that our identity, that means the face that we put out there in the world, social media, our communities, our connections, our daily life, the things that we value, right? When our identity is undergoing a rebirth, what happens in the evolution of that identity is that we must ultimately address the roots of where that identity comes from. And that's why I think this Pluto square is absolutely so fundamental to the Aquarius transit, because what happens when the nodal axis moves into Aries and Libra and squares Pluto back at that last degree of Capricorn, we have to go back essentially to a south node in Libra that is ruled by Venus, right? And here we have Venus in Leo, which is ruled by the sun, and the sun is where opposite Pluto in the sign of Cancer. In with Mercury, Mercury ruling that sun, or being ruled by that sun, and the relationship also between this Virgo moon, which is opposite Neptune. So we have to go back to the roots of where we come from. Where do we come from? And where does everyone come from, where, all of those unmet needs, all of those core instinctual places where we have defense mechanisms, where we have wounds, Chiron being the wounded healer. Chiron will get a conjunction from the North Node in the coming year, as a part of, for what is for many, their Chiron return at around age 50, 51. So this is also a very powerful Chironic time, in that so many of us, I should have grabbed the book that just arrived at my doorstep. Yeah, so I just ordered this book, From Trauma to Freedom, which literally just arrived today. It's kind of the perfect book for this particular talk, because from the trauma that we carry on a collective level. Now we're talking about Capricorn trauma. And when we look at what is Capricorn trauma, well, that is the imprinting of the patriarchy. It is the trauma of colonization. It is the trauma of oppression. It is the trauma of government structures. It is the trauma of suppression of the feminine, right? And what is the feminine? Cancer, the mother, the Pluto polarity point of what it is like to have grown up in a society where mothering and motherhood and the feminine, and even our relationship to the feminine, has become so deeply distorted. And so we can see even in this signature that the resolution node is the South Node, Libra, relationship, harmony, balance, ruled by Venus, but Venus in Leo, Venus where it's about the feminine being seen. It's about the feminine being heard. It's about the voice. And then where's the masculine? Where is Mars, who's ruling that North Node in Aries? He's in Virgo. Discernment, devotion, care, and the Virgo capacity, right, to organize and analyze and systematize, right? But for the purpose of what? What do we use our devotion for? And what's interesting about this particular square is that it goes on for some time, because the nodes move in a retrograde motion. We have several days that this is an exact here, 2906, 2906. This is also the station day for Venus, where she stations retrograde. But then we have several days where this progresses, and it goes in and out of being tight and being pretty much exact, as the moon moves into the sign of Libra. And then the moon will join. First, we start in this polarity with the sun squaring the nodal axis, opposing Pluto. And eventually, in the coming days, as the nodal axis tightens into its second square, we have the moon on the South Node, also the moon moving into its square to Pluto. This is really a part of an ongoing initiation, right? And I did an earlier talk this month on Venus and Pluto, because that for me lays the framework, the feminine's relationship to all this work. And the feminine exists inside of each and every one of us, regardless of our identity, right? A Pluto-Aquarius, we might have a non-binary identity or a different identity. We might have a different orientation towards our humanity. We might even feel that we come from a different planet or have a different constellational archetype that lives inside of us. But irregardless, we all are coming from the same seed, that core seed, mother, father, sun, moon, or Saturn, moon, um, masculine, feminine. We all have the evolutionary ground that we're all standing upon includes all of the patriarchal distortions of the time of Pluto and Capricorn. And if we look back from a historical perspective, the last time that Pluto was at the last degrees of Capricorn was the end of the American, uh, you know, just after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, after America became a country and of its own, the United States. And it was the end of a Revolutionary War, a period of time where war was very much a part of the culture. And what was happening during that time, interestingly, the nodes were in Cancer Capricorn, right? So this is the foundational dynamic that most souls on this planet right now are living with, the conscious or unconscious, right? Evolution is not always conscious. Pluto represents on a fundamental core level that which is unconscious in us. And, this can be the desires, the drives, the motivations that are unconscious, and also the foundational, right? If we're not aware of race, like our racism, our biases, our oppression, our suppression, whatever we are unconscious of, continues to operate through our projections, which are Venus, our perceptions, how we see the world, the lens through which, and a lot of this, and in the case of Cancer Capricorn, these are the family dynamics, the ancestral, in particular, family dynamics that have come through generations, right? The ways in which our mothers suppressed their feelings, the ways in which our fathers distorted the feminine, right? The ways in which the victim perpetrator archetype of the masculine and feminine, the war between the sexes, has perpetuated imbalances of power, imbalances of authority, imbalances of understanding, and distortions where in relationship we need to control one another, we need to dominate, we need to hide who we truly are. We cannot be honest or vulnerable or be seen, right? And these are the things that on a collective level we will need to be evolving, right? Whenever we have a planet squaring the nodal axis, right, in evolutionary astrology, that planet squaring the nodal axis indicates that one of the nodes is a resolution node. It is a place where we can resolve the dynamic, but there is the challenge in that planetary placement that we are going to feel the call between that which is familiar, that which is known, that which is inherent in our being, and that which is unknown, right? That which is uncomfortable, right? Facing our own oppression, facing our own family dynamics and the way that they play out in our life and in our relationship, facing the traumas and the imprinting from oppression might otherwise feel like Aries, North Node, cutting off relationships, ending and severing ties, that where we can't seem to resolve this thing because either, in this case, where is Mars in Virgo? Either we cannot have communication about it or a dialogue without not seeing eye to eye. Here we have Mars in opposition to Saturn, right? Our conditioning around authority figures, right? That comes up in relationship, especially in intimate relationship. An intimate relationship is most often the place where we can distort the partner or the beloved, the person that is in front of us, right? We're talking about the axis from from a natural zodiac perspective of first house Aries, self, seventh house Libra, the other, right? If we're having from that perspective, then the self, right? The self, which would normally be the lead point for our own evolution, is that sense where we often feel like we have to cut ties with something. And I've seen, at least in my own practice in this last year, so many people facing that the reality that a relationship had to end, that they had to end a relationship in order to separate themselves from a dynamic in the relationship that wasn't able to change because in the evolution, both parties were not willing to evolve, right? And this is a question that I posed on the EA forum recently. You can access that forum at jwgaea.org. I can put that in the chat. On the forum, I asked a question about soulmates and karma mates, and whether or not souls which have a karmic relationship can resolve a dynamic if both parties are not willing to embrace the evolutionary change that is required. Right. And in this case, we can see, right, what is the dynamic here? It's North Node in Aries, right? That would be the masculine. That would be Mars ruled. South Node in Libra, that would be Venus, right? So with Pluto and this square to the nodal axis, the resolution node is the South Node in Libra. And in fact, the last time that node joined with Pluto was when the South Node was in Capricorn. So the foundations of our ancestry that we could go back to from the 1700s, those ancestors, that foundational time period is the foundation point from which we are working all of the karmic and evolutionary patterns that are present in our world today. Right. So we can say that foundation, a time when, a country was trying to liberate, revolutionize itself and become free from the dominant monarchy of England, right? A country that was also built upon the claiming of native lands, indigenous lands from the people who were indigenous to those places. We call them now Native Americans, but they were the people who lived on that land before it was stolen from them, before they were killed, and genocide was the foundation of that. And then we have slavery and racism, which was also the foundation of that. And if we think about it too, the contract of marriage, the legal, the use of marriage as a contract, which was an agreement usually between a father and a man who was marrying a woman. The contract of marriage was the first term in 1776 where the term whiteness was actually coined. There's a woman historian who was also working with Robin DiAngelo, who's a really incredible teacher on anti-racism. Robin's work is phenomenal, and she introduces this historical research, which builds the context for which we have basically have an entire mindset based on. So right, these are the foundations of life itself: the mother, the father, the deep ancestry, marriage, children, family dynamics. All of these things were built in this time. And now we have souls who are coming to a crisis point. If I go back to the present moment, a crisis point of identity, a crisis point of where the masculine and the feminine can no longer operate in ways of war and domination, where family systems are so stretched by what has been created out of this, which is the model of capitalism and government that has, had has supported an entire economy, right? We have economy, Taurus, North Node in Taurus, our entire economic system. And very interesting because I'm a former financial advisor, and I've seen some of my colleagues and people that I worked with in the past bringing up things recently about bank failures, which are beginning again. And when Pluto first entered into Capricorn back in 2008, we saw a mass crisis of the banking institutions. And why was that? Because lending had been done based upon faulty standards, which were allowing banks to lend more money than they actually had. We actually legitimized a system of lending that was based on unreal money. And that was lent to people based on income, which was often stated income. And a lot of those stated income loans, of course, became unable to be stable, right? Taurus, unable to be stable because people were unable to pay those debts. And those were based on interest rates that were built into a system that naturally increased the interest rates a certain period of time. So if you were very aware and tracking, you would understand that there was a bubble that was meaning to burst, because there was no way that people living on stated income that didn't really exist could continue to pay interest rates that were unable to be stable, right? These are recipes for financial disaster. Now, I'm not trying to scare anyone from this perspective. I'm just simply noting, like, at this time, we have Pluto and Capricorn at the late degrees and squaring the nodal axis, Taurus, Scorpio, physical, financial security, Scorpio, emotional intimacy, trans, our ancestry, our transformation, the deepest parts of our nervous systems that are hardwired for attachment and for connection, for survival, right? And Aquarius and Leo, which is like our community, humanity, and our personal identity. So these things are up for question. And I have seen in the recent days more announcements of banks that have been lending, in particular Silicon Valley Bank, which recently, you know, was named that, they were lending to the tech industry, right? So we have Aquarius, technology. We also have the emergences of a completely alternative currency system in the world of cryptocurrency, which is a very, very Aquarian ideal, although not born in the Aquarian age per se. Cryptocurrency is, and Adam Summer, who is also an evolutionary astrology, has a whole thing on the astrology of Bitcoin. He'll be doing a free talk for NCGR San Francisco on the astrology of Bitcoin. I believe it's next month, but you can go to NCGRSF or sanfrancisco.org to register for that. Cryptocurrency is decentralized currency, and it is not, it is one of those things that the government has been trying desperately in the last several years to regulate. And one of the interesting things about cryptocurrency is that it is essentially powerful in its deregulation and in its decentralization, right? Those are all Aquarian ideals. So we have what's happening here, the shifting of power structures. And we also have, and will have in this time period, a shifting in our government. It's bound to manifest that what we have to work out as human beings is how to work together, how to live together, how to love each other, how to raise families, how to have children, how to do human life in the next stage, in the next phase of evolution. How do we face and become anti-racist? How do we move beyond capitalistic systems that are designed to oppress the majority? Actually, most people think that they're trying to live the American dream to get their piece of financial freedom, but don't realize how they're participating in a larger system of economic control, manipulation, domination, right? And as we move towards self-reliance, self-sufficiency, right? Even in relationship, if we are trying to be in relationship to one another and using old ways of relating where marriage is based on domination, control, emotional suppression of the masculine or the feminine, dishonesty of any kind, not being authentic, not being true to ourselves, not being able to realize the truth of who we are as human beings, right? That all relationships are going to be undergoing on some level this evolutionary push. This is a big reason why in my upcoming class series, Love Evolution, I'm focusing entirely on Venus's relationship to this, because Venus is here joining, she's, squaring Pluto right now, like in these coming days. She's moving through a square to Pluto, and she is heading towards the North Node, right? She's kicking off a cycle where Pluto's moving into Aquarius, where she's saying, okay, this is what I want. This is the new dream. This is what I'm growing. This is what I'm here to evolve. This is what I value, right? And when we commit to what we value, when we really are deeply saying, I'm going to anchor and embed my life in what I value, what is most important to my heart, what I love, we are naturally going to be forced to let go of everything that's in the way of that. And a big part of any planet squaring the nodes is that flip-flop dynamic, right? Where we're going back and forth between the nodes as a way of releasing the past and integrating what is coming online, right? There's some part of ourselves that we're simultaneously shedding. And there's going to be, on some level, with this particular evolutionary push, a way in which we're having to bring on board new ways of behaving in love, in relationship, in family, in our relationship to how we relate to the earth, to the money that we make, to the time, how we spend our time, where we devote our time to, what we give our thinking to, what we use our thoughts for, you know, how we communicate our feelings, our emotions, how we forgive, how we let go. All these things, right, are going to be up for building something new for sure. And the new is already coming in, it's already beginning. I think this ingress also of the sun at the equinox point is a really interesting one, because and I'll get further along here so that we can get into the eclipse as well. But this ingress is a 0-degree Aries sun with a closing Baslamic Pisces moon. To me, that moon applying to Neptune also reinforces how deeply important what is coming up relative to Mars and our will and our desire, and how we are aligning our evolutionary will with the divine will, right? How we are looking at our thinking, at our past history, how what has gotten us to where we are, right? When we have such a powerful evolutionary push, everyone on every level of consciousness is going to be affected by this, right? And some of us have a consciousness where we are looking at our natal chart, we are looking at our lives, we are evaluating where we need to grow. I've been really rereading a lot of this Pluto book, really, to get into the essence of the involvement, right? Of the relationships, of the dynamics that are being catalyzed at this particular point in time. I think that Jeffrey Wolf Green was onto something in his understanding of how evolution, um, you know, was going to take that which is unconscious, right? And in this case, it's all that Pluto and Capricorn material, the foundational evolution. And, in a way, how can we know what our ancestors in 1777, what pain and trauma they had that was unhealed, that continues to be present in our lives today? Well, we can simply know that by looking at what is paining us on an individual and a collective level today. We can look at what is paining our families. Where are the relationships still cut off? Who are the people that we're not talking to? Chiron, where is the wound that is, a part of our soul's journey that we're actively working to try and heal? I ordered this book, From Trauma to Freedom, because it's like, that's, to me, speaks to the crux of the journey of Pluto at the last degrees of Capricorn into Aquarius, right? In order for us to give way to a whole new reality from an evolutionary standpoint, where humankind comes into living and relating and, and we have to think about this. This is a 20-year cycle for Pluto to be in Aquarius. We're just at the beginning of the end, right? We're at the end of the end relative to this evolutionary cycle, and the beginning of the beginning. And that end of the end is really right now, South Node in Scorpio, resolving those undercurrent traumas in our life that lead us to feel jaded, betrayed, distrustful, the patterns in which we are being hurt, manipulated, dominated, controlled, where our power is given to others. This calls us back to Taurus, self-reliance, self-trust, agency, where we can heal our trauma, where we can really take in and say, no, this stops in my family. I am the pattern breaker, right? Any children that are born at this time are definitely here to disrupt the pattern, if not already. Like, we have this whole group of children that were born with Pluto, at the last degrees of Capricorn, late degrees of Capricorn, any of these Aquarius babies that will be born in this, we have a brief time of Pluto and Aquarius, by the way, between March 23rd and May 1st, when Pluto goes retrograde, and then it will return back into Capricorn and begin to move towards the nodal square. That is, part of why I'm seeing the initiation of this journey with Venus as beginning right now. And I'm starting my Love Evolution class with that. So we're doing the first intro class on March 23rd. I'll be diving into Venus on the North Node, and her relationship to Pluto in that time. And then each month we're going to be moving through Pluto's cycle relative to Venus in that class. And each month is dedicated to a different theme and a different topic. But you're welcome to join me for that free intro class. The focus of this is because of that South Node in Libra being the resolution node, right? We have to do the work of relationship, and that work of relationship begins from within. How we relate to relationship begins from within. It begins from our perceptions. It begins with our feelings. It begins with our inner masculine, feminine balance. It begins with our choice to face our parental patterns, our roots, right? Our Cancer, Capricorn, Aries, Libra, that inner masculine, feminine, that inner mother, father. That's where all of that healing actually and evolutionary work lies. And this is what ends up, rippling out into the world as conscious changes. And I'm speaking to this because we do with evolution, we always have the choice to cooperate or to resist, right? And I think there is even a middle path, maybe. My sense is it's not just resistance or cooperation, and that surrender from a Neptune perspective, that's that feeling of being carried by the divine when we are no longer resisting and we're moving towards cooperation. That surrender is an aspect of moving towards cooperation. But as we move in this way towards the nodal square, one of the things that happens along the way is that we have a solar eclipse. And I find this eclipse really powerful and fascinating because it happens after Venus is, moved into Gemini. Mars is in Cancer. So that the moon is ruled by Mars. It is a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse. So it's the sun and moon together. So it's a new moon essentially, but it's at the 29th degree of Aries, and it is the first lunation that happens really in pretty tight square to Pluto. Before this new moon, we have a new moon at 0 degrees Aries, but it's not, this is pretty much, this is in the square. Most astrologers would use this orb, and we have Jupiter there as well in this lunation, all ruled by this Mars in Cancer, who's moving towards an opposition to Pluto. So I think this eclipse in and of itself will kick off and catalyze the underlying shift that is coming through with the nodal square. And the reason why I note it as being so important is because it shares the same degree that the North Node will be at when the square to Pluto is exact. And because eclipses in and of themselves are very powerful kind of gateway points that usher in this case, we have a new moon on the North Node. Right after this eclipse, the moon will cross and join with the North Node. So even though they're out of sign, that's significant in and of itself, right? It's speaking to, from an evolutionary perspective, there is some part of us that is already readying in the new, that is already beginning to develop ourselves in this way, and something is coming in that will essentially facilitate and support the dynamic journey, that tension between that South Node in Libra and the North Node in Aries, right? We want our individuality, right? That strong drive towards freedom is an important part. It is the part of the masculine that creates, right? And the drive in the feminine in Venus, the drive towards relationship. And I was talking about this with someone earlier today about how, like, the masculine element is that which creates war, in a sense. That is the drive, right, towards war. And the feminine is the drive towards connection, right? And if we're ending a cycle, right, in 1777 was the Revolutionary War. That was like, even that word, Revolutionary War, that was a cycle of change that was changing everything fundamentally to how people lived. We are in our own essential revolutionary war, but this is coming through our daily lives and our humanity and our vulnerability and our thinking and our relationships and our financial security, right? What is marriage? It's a sign of security. Most people are seeking marriage because seeking partnership and security, it's like the knowing that you're going to have somebody to care for you. In the sort of 1700s, when marriage, marriage laws were being enacted, it was about the financial security of a family. Even to this day, marriage, the end of a marriage, is one of the most dynamic financial destructions of a person's life. It can be so destabilizing for people to leave relationships, because if we're coming into relationship and leaving relationship in a worse financial state, right? There can be so much fear attached to leaving a relationship. But this is where the repair, right, of the masculine and the feminine, the balance of relationship, where we become able to come into relationship with one another, to actually choose kinship and to choose relating and to choose commitment and marriage and partnership, where we are addressing the fears and the financial insecurities, and we are addressing the family dynamics, and we are addressing, where humanity can kind of grow into a way of relating to one another that is different from what we know today, right? And we don't even know yet what that will look like on a fundamental level. In the year ahead, all people will on some level be facing, what is a square to the nodes? It is a crisis in consciousness. All people on some level will be, having to learn about society. This is directly from Pluto, Evolutionary Journey of the Soul. Crisis in consciousness, the individual having learned all there was to learn about society, culture, and having become a socialized being in that context, now experiences a repolarization of the consciousness. The crisis resolves around issues of the past where he or she has just been and the future. The evolutionary intention is to begin preliminary embraces of the universal, the timeless, and the absolute. The old no longer serves as a map through which the individual can create social and personal meaning, and what to believe, what to think, and how to relate become pressing issues as the individual begins the journey of deconditioning him or herself, right? So this is a complete deconditioning process from a perspective of society, of vulnerability, of relationship, of what we instinctually know and are here to cause and create. It's an initiation of our medicine, which from a Chiron perspective, I think this is the thing of like, wherever we have gifts, wherever we have healing, wherever we have work this is your work to do. My teacher, Shiloh Sophia, she's my painting teacher. She's an incredible painter. She does this thing called the red thread, and she says everyone is responsible for their portion of the red thread, right? From an evolutionary perspective, this square to the nodal axis is like, yeah, everybody, you've got your piece of the red thread. You have your family blood lineage, you have your relationships, your children, your partners, your friends, your beloved others, yourself, This is your piece of the evolution to pick up. Yourself, Aries, North Node in Aries, yourself. You're responsible for doing your evolutionary work. These are your traumas that you pick up, that you heal, your medicine that you make from your commitment to seeing yourself. And I love what Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about, if you get to the roots, the branches will take care of themselves. That to me speaks so much. If we go to the South Node, if we work on the relational patterns, the emotional patterns, the traumas that we carry, the pieces where we don't feel free to be ourselves, where we feel still someone else's authority, external authority, dictating our value, whether or not we're able to forgive, whether or not we're able to fully love or give ourselves in relationship, how we're able to show up with Neptune in Pisces, unconditional love, right? And everyone has their piece of the red thread, in this case their piece of the square to the nodal axis, that they are going to work in their own lives, right? And we will have friends and family members who are consciously choosing. We will have counterparts who are consciously choosing to pick up their work. The people who come to me for sessions are absolutely hands down people who are like committed to doing their work. And this is a big reason why I continue to show up in this work and do what I'm doing, and really, my commitment is to healing the heart of the feminine, to doing the South Node Libra work of healing, right? Healing in relationship. How do we create peace and harmony in our relationships? How do we heal past patterns of codependency, and where we can come into interdependency with one another, with our friendships, with our relationships, with our beloveds, where we can come into breaking the family patterns and like actually picking up where our ancestors left off, because they left off somewhere where they were limited by their evolutionary stage and the consciousness that they were able to bring. And yet they left us with traces and messages and information and capacities that we are here now tasked to heal, to face, to resolve. And that's what I really believe this Pluto square is inviting everyone into. It's a resolution of that, and we have to go, unfortunately, from the perspective of the square, we have to go back to the past. And this pretty much culminates with a summer of retrogrades, which is really intense. And I went into a bit of that during my first talk. And a big part of my commitment through Love Evolution is we're going to go all the way through the square to the nodes. We're going to get into Venus. We're going to do the Venus work, basically, the South Node work of work on relationships through the lens of the feminine, which is obviously the lens that I bring in this lifetime. I chose to be a female-bodied person with Venus on the South Node in Capricorn. So that's why I do the work. That's the work that I'm here to do. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I love your comments, and feel free to be in touch with me. You can find more on my website, astrologywithmichelle.com. You can sign up for the Venus North Node introduction, which will be happening right after Pluto moves into Aquarius on the 23rd of March at noon Pacific Standard Time. There's lots of different ways to work with me, and you can find them all on my website, astrologywithmichelle.com/soul work. Yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I will put links to all of the things that you've mentioned, all of your ways to contact you in the description of the video on YouTube. and we sure thank you. This was awesome. It was just awesome.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
thank you.